Yeah, you read that right. I made 50 models and I learned a lot doing it. For the past few years, around the holidays, I've made a bunch of gifts to give away to my friends. Last year I made 25 of these Strombeast legs, and they were a big hit. Building one of something is relatively easy. But as you make more, it gets harder. New classes of problems start to arise. My hope is to expose you to these problems as I build 50 of this year's model. Speaking of, I'm building a miniature of a mechanism regular viewers should find familiar, my letterpress. This model will omit a ton of details, but it should have a working bed and roller mechanism at least. Last year, I made my model out of aluminum, and that worked out really well. So I'll be doing that again this year. First up, I'm going to make all the moving pieces at the back of the mechanism, starting with the roller frame. I'll arrange these bars into stacks, so I can do each operation 10 at a time. First off, I'll drill all the holes. Second, I'll contour the outside to shape. Using the same process, I was able to shape all the pieces in the back of the letterpress. These are the 4 moving pieces in the back of the mechanism, 2 roller frames and 2 linkages. The next part to figure out is the side frame. I laid this out according to the CAD model ahead of time, and now I just have to cut it out. Okay, let's see how it fits. Yeah, that passes the test. Let me refine the shape a little more, and then I think we'll be in business. Oh yeah, that's looking really nice. There's one last unfinalized part in here, the bed, and I'm gonna make that now. And that just about finishes up the back of the letterpress. Now I need to mass produce these side plates. I'll trace my template and make a bunch of duplicates. Oh, and there's a few holes to drill too. The next part I have to make is a crank for the end of the drive shaft. This part is what will actually drive the mechanism back and forth. I'm going to make them from some scrap aluminum a friend gave me. Each crank has a center hole and an offset hole. And the outside is round. I'm going to cut out the plug with an annular cutter. There's a little bit of flashing around the outside, but I can clean that up with some tin snips. Okay, now to mass produce them. The most critical dimension on each part is the distance between the two holes. But if the perimeter circle isn't perfectly concentric, that's fine. It just needs to be close. So I drilled all the holes, and then did a second pass, eyeballing the position of the outside circle. This went pretty fast at the expense of some accuracy, but I think it was worth it. Next up, the bed plates. There are 2 of these on each press, which means I have to make 100 of them. That's a lot. I started out in a similar fashion to the side plates, by tracing my template. I cut up the big plate into smaller pieces that were easier to handle. And then rough cut each individual side plate. Now, this was the most tedious part of this whole project. I individually cut each of these pieces out on the bandsaw. Though it was tedious, I wanted to make sure each of these parts was shaped correctly. I had the tunes going though, so it was fine. I thought about trying to stack and cut multiple parts at once, but trying to contend with the clamp holding all the parts together was going to make cutting them much harder. And I didn't want to get adhesive all over my bandsaw, so that was out too. Drilling and countersinking a few holes completes these parts. We're almost ready to put together the first subassembly. There's one more piece left, the bed. Making that piece starts on the table saw. Each bed piece has 2 tapped holes on each side. These interface with the holes in the bed plates to form the bed assembly. The next part to add to the bed assembly is the back shaft. The back shaft has a tapped hole on one end. Let me form that now. An important thing to realize when you're making lots of something is that every operation takes a long time. A 1 minute long operation applied to 50 parts is almost an hour, so plan ahead. Fixing problems is costly. Here's a great example. The back shaft fits into this hole in the back of the bed assembly. But I drilled this hole too small. So I had to go through each of these one at a time and fix them. Learn from my mistake, measure twice, cut once. Each back shaft is pressed into a roller frame in the vise. Then I can put them together. The other roller frame goes onto the other side, and they are linked with 2 bolts in the back. The last piece to add to the bed assembly is one of the linkages. That attaches into the hole at the end of the back shaft. With the bed assembly complete, I can attach it to the side plates. I'll press the crank into the drive shaft on the vise, and then I can add the crank into the whole assembly. Finally, let's add the last linkage. And here's the final letterpress model. Let me actuate it for you. So that came out pretty well. But on its own, the model is pretty fragile. It really needs some sort of base that it can sit on. Just like last year, I bought a bunch of hardwood locally, and I'm going to cut that up into all the bases. First, I'll cut down the long boards into more manageable sections. Each base is a 4" by 4" square. In the top surface of each base, I'll cut 2 small slits. I'll use these to affix the model later. Now I'll cut a cavity for some of the innards. I also need to cut a small slot for the power switch. Inside the cavity, I'll add a battery pack. And install a switch into the slot. In order to get power to the motor, I'll drill a hole. I'll explain how all this will work momentarily. A little bit of soldering is required to tie all the components together. Okay, here's the base. A model fits right into these slots and sits on top. But, as I alluded to before, we've got to power this thing somehow, and that's where the motor comes in. When making last year's model, I tested a bunch of motors. I ended up settling on a small servo motor, modified for continuous rotation. If you want to know more about the servo, look up SG90. I'll put a link in the description if you want to learn more, but I'm going to use those again this year. Let me show you the process. This year, the motor is going to be exposed, so I need to give each one a paint job. Now, there's one more part needed. Somehow, the motor has to be held in precisely the right place to actuate the model. I need a special bracket. I'll drill a hole down its length to run the wires. And now we can attach the motor to the model. A little bit of glue holds everything together. Okay, let's see how it moves. So 50, huh? We only made one. What gives? It's a process. I have around 10 fully assembled at this point, but I have the parts for all 50 made. I'm a chronic underestimator of work, and I still have some assembly to do on the rest of them. So I guess, technically no, I didn't make all 50 yet, but I'm close, and I wanted to get this video out before the end of the year. So, what have I learned throughout this process? Well, the first and most important thing when you're making lots of something is the difference between accuracy and precision. Accuracy refers to how close a measurement is to its true value. Precision refers to how close a set of measurements are to each other. Sometimes you really need a feature to be in a certain place, but other times it's more critical that two features line up on two distinct parts, even if they aren't exactly on the mark. Being able to make decisions about these sorts of things on the fly is part of what elevates a project from good to great. Periodically, I found myself trying to determine how critical a specific dimension was to the mechanism working. For example, there are a few holes that if misplaced would cause the whole mechanism to bind up. And there are other features that exist purely for aesthetic purposes. In other words, if they're off slightly, it doesn't really matter. Since I was keeping this in mind, I was able to prioritize the critical dimensions and deprioritize the non-critical ones. Anyway, hopefully those perspectives are helpful. I'm definitely not a total expert, but I like to think I'm not a total novice either. Just like last year, I've budgeted 3 extra models I'm going to give away to anyone who's interested. Would you like one of your own? Follow the instructions in the description and you might win one. What do you think of this year's model? Let me know in the comments below. And thanks for watching. See you in 2021.